The Declaration of Independence is a world-famous document remembered for being America's first major step towards independence from Britain. In addition to being a vital part of the birth of a new nation, the Declaration is also a prime example of Enlightenment ideas in the face of authoritarian rule. To fully understand this, one must look at the factors that created the need for the Declaration. The conditions leading to American independence began after the 7 Years' War. The 7 Years' War, known to Americans as the French and Indian War, was fought between European powers in 1764. Before this, American colonists had been taxed far less than the citizens living in Britain. However, after fighting an expensive war, Britain started to tax colonists more heavily to make up for the costs. The colonists did not accept these new taxes. Previously living so far from the seat of power had granted them a certain degree of exemption from the kingdom's rule and regulations, so they quickly began to resent any new taxes. First, Britain passed the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act was a tax on stamps, which primarily affected those who wrote frequently, such as lawyers and businessmen. This backfired because it irritated the most eloquent groups, who rallied against it and eventually pressured Britain into repealing this act. Britain then created the townshend duties, which were taxes on common items such as tea, paper, paint, and lead. The colonists continued to resist these acts by boycotting British products until the townshend duties were also repealed. The main grievance of the colonists was that they were being taxed even though they had no representation in Parliament. This point was debated with Britain to no avail in 1773, when Britain further damaged its relation with America by passing the Regulation Act, which stated that the British East Indian Company would have the exclusive right to sell tea in America. In response, a group of disguised colonists boarded a tea ship in Boston and threw all the tea overboard. This event, which became known as the Boston Tea Party, was quickly punished by Britain with the creation of the Intolerable Acts. These acts restricted the freedom of colonists by closing the Boston Harbor, forbidding town meetings in Massachusetts, making British officials immune to criminal prosecution, and requiring colonists to quarter British soldiers. This was another wrong move by Britain, because the colonists hated these acts so much that they were even mentioned in the Declaration as reasons to pursue independence. The colonists only began resisting British laws more, and tensions quickly increased. Armed conflict arose in 1775, but not every colonist was on the side of the revolutionaries. One philosopher, Thomas Paine, openly endorsed the idea of independence by publishing a short pamphlet called Common Sense, which convinced many fence-sitters to the cause of the revolution. Thomas Paine and John Locke both influenced the Declaration with their ideas about human rights and freedom from tyranny. Shortly after the release of Common Sense, the Continental Congress was assembled and a Declaration of Independence was drafted. The final draft of the Declaration was approved by Continental Congress on July 4, 1776. It was primarily written by Thomas Jefferson, who began by stating that it is the people's right to overthrow their government if it fails to serve them. This idea was a favorite topic of John Locke, and is one of the numerous examples of Enlightenment influences in the Declaration. Another famous line, "Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness," is also an almost direct quote from John Locke. Jefferson goes on to list of numerous examples of how British governments has violated the unalienable rights of the colonists. Many complaints are mentioned, including the Unfairness Quartering Act, the suppression of local governments, and the obstruction of justice committed by Britain. Jefferson used these points to justify the rebellion in what was one of the first instances of the people demanding that the government must answer to them. Upon reading the Declaration, the reigning King of Britain, King George III, declared the colonies to be in a state of rebellion, thus officially turning the revolution into a war. American independence was won in 1781, and the Second Continental Congress eventually wrote the Constitution, which followed up the Declaration by ensuring the protection of man's unalienable rights. Although these rights only extended to privileged groups, the Declaration of Independence set a precedent that was very progressive for its time. In fact, it even affected a few other countries. The French Declaration of the Rights of Man was influenced by it, and Liberia and Vietnam would later write similar documents to claim independence for their own colonizers. The Declaration of Independence would change politics globally for many reasons. In addition to influencing other countries and establishing a new nation, it also severely wounded the British Empire at the height of its power. But most importantly, it was a demand for the people to be protected and taken seriously by the government. It was one of the first and most successful examples of citizens rejecting unjust authority by taking power into their own hands and forming a better system, which is why it is still remembered throughout America and the modern world.